One of the things that's interesting to keep in mind, the Harappan civilization was one of the oldest, if not the oldest, old world civilization, covering about 1,300,000 square kilometers. So it was a pretty big area to try to, maybe not control is the right word, but to at least integrate. The writing system of the Harappans is one of the only major writing systems in the ancient world that hasn't been deciphered. It is believed that it was used to track trade goods. Somewhere over 400 unique symbols have been identified, and that we find these on the stamps or those seals that we just looked at. Some of the symbols are animals, so we have pictographs, but we also have quite a few abstract symbols. But it does seem like most of the seals represent economic items. We do know that they did have an extensive trade system, because we do find Indus Valley seals at Sumerian cities, but we don't find Sumerian stuff in the Indus Valley, and it could just be that they were trading perishable goods. And we do know that they had a lot of intrastate trade. So here's a map of the projected trade routes, and you can see that they were kind of all over the place, all the way up into the Indo-European plateau up here, or Indo-Aryan plateau, and then coming all the way over here, which would be Mesopotamia. So I mentioned Lothal. There we go. Definitely looks like it was an entrepot. So we find factories here. We find artifacts in quite large quantities, and they show all of the production stages. So again, that's a really good indication to us that they were making everything there. So again, that we do find that bead factory, and some of the materials they were using were carnelian, crystal, and jasper. We find like an ornament factory, and there we find a lot of bronze and elephant tusks. So they did have these communities really set up well, as a well-organized system. The Harappans were the first of the ancient civilizations to come up with a municipal water and sewage system. They're about 9 miles wide drainage ditches on either side of 9 meters, not 9 miles, of drainage ditches on either side of the main street. We see evidence of public toilets. Most residences had private baths and showers, and then they had deep trenches that sloped downwards to take the water and so forth away. Then we do see what appears to be an equitable distribution of wealth, which has led some people to suggest that the Harappan civilization was the first socialist state. And the reason they say that is because there is an overall impression of uniformity. We don't find palaces, we don't find religious temples, and we don't find royal tombs. So if you think back to the Queen Puabi burial in Mesopotamia, with just overloaded with artifacts, we don't find anything like that here. So it does look like at least everybody had access to what they needed to survive. So here's a typical burial. It does have pots and so forth in it. You can see them over here too after they've been excavated, and still some of those red globular pots being made. This is about the closest thing we have to any kind of evidence of a ruler, so an individual in effigy. We don't find a lot of art. Doesn't mean they didn't produce it. It might just be that it didn't preserve. A lot of it's in terracotta figurines, so we do find that's probably the thing we find the most. I also find some down here. We also find animals that pop up. These are monkeys, I believe. And we see a lot of faience. So all of this jewelry is actually a faience, and that's just simply a fine glazed ceramic, generally in blues, greens, and red browns. So that's kind of it for the art and jewelry. Another kind of interesting thing about the Harappan civilization is that it didn't evolve into a subsequent civilization. We actually do see kind of an exodus from the Indus River Valley, and at the same time we see population increase in the Ganges River Valley. So the decline, again, around 3900 BP, it doesn't happen exactly then, it's of course over time, but there are several theories. One is the Aryan invasion. So Aryan invaders from Central Asia and Iran swept down into the river valley. The evidence for this comes from a couple different places. One is the Rig Veda, which is the oldest surviving Vedic Sanskrit text, and this describes the conquest of dark-skinned natives, which is interpreted as the Harappans, by lighter-skinned invaders, which is interpreted as the Indo-Europeans out of the Kafka Mountains. And we do know that they did invade a lot of places, and we do see an Indo-European influence increase after 3900 BP. They also found some skeletons sprawled in the streets of Mohenjo-Daro. They're men and women, people of all ages, so that's been interpreted as a sign of conflict. But there have been further studies, and there's some contradictory evidence now. Some people believe that those skeletons are actually very formally buried, and with more excavation, we've found that there is evidence of Indo-European present prior to this decline of the Harappan civilization. So it's not a strong argument anymore. Other people have argued for catastrophic floods. Now, hydrologists and geomorphologists argue that cities along the Indus would have had to deal with prolonged flooding caused by, of course, shifts in the Earth's crust at the mouth of the Indus. And that they say there was quite a bit of evidence of that from around 4,000 to around 3,900 years ago. There are no settlements near the mouth of the river, so that's some good evidence for that. There are fossil beaches that are several miles from the present coast, and that's what we would expect to see if the river's route to the sea was blocked by uplift. So there is some evidence for that. And another idea is environmental shift. So changes in the local environment cause people to move. Human alteration of the environment due to overgrazing, overcultivation, deforestation would have led to environmental degradation. So we see decreased agricultural yield. In other areas of the world, we do know that powers collapse when the agricultural yield is undermined. We see African millet introduced at this time, and it's actually not suitable to the Indus River Valley, but it's very suitable to the Ganges River Valley. So it might be that it's a combination of all of these things happening. It's probably not a monocausal reason, but multi-causal. And that's kind of it for the Indus Valley. Very, very, very quick introduction to it. Still lots of archaeology being done in the area. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Jomon. So this is one of the first cultures identified in Japan, and it's first identified here on Kyushu Island. So this particular culture first emerged during the terminal Upper Pleistocene, so somewhere between 12.5 thousand years ago to 2.3 thousand years ago. The most important thing about the Jomon